Hey, my name is Josh Braner, and this is my project to graduate with honors from Nucamp's Full Stack Bootcamp. My project is a chat application using the full MERN stack and Socket.io. This application supports everything you would expect out of a very basic chat application, such as logging in and account registration. After that, you can, of course, do the most important thing, which is chat back and forth. The chat down here will then update for everyone involved, have the usernames appended to them, and so on. And then, of course, you can click the little log out button up here to log out. We've got a whole lot going on here, and we're going to dive into the code really fast. So first, as a quick explanation, the backend is using Express to create a small web server that manages a Socket.io instance and a small REST API to handle user authentication and database management. Socket.io creates a WebSocket that then persists the connection and handles the back and forth between the client and the server, receiving messages, storing them into the database, and then admitting them back to the client. So what's happening here is Socket.io is creating a persistent connection between my server and my client. Then on the client side, it sends information up through Socket.io that gives it all the information that it needs. It creates a new document within my chat collection and creates the chat collection if it does not already exist. And then it stores it in the database and then sends it back to the client. So that's what Socket.io is doing. After that, my REST API is used to handle registration, authentication, login, checking to see if somebody can actually go through the protected routes that I have on the client side, and so on. All of that is happening right here. There was a lot to figure out with all of this because I'm using JSON web tokens and then I had to store them in the client. More on that later. Let's hop over to the client side real quick to look at this chat box. So basically what's happening in the chat box is that Socket.io is taking the message once you type it in and press send. That's going up into my handle submit function, which is then building an object with the username and the message. The message is then sent through the socket emit to the server. The server is then doing everything that it needs to do with that by storing it in the database, and then it sends it back and triggers this handle new message function. This handle new message function is then adding that to the chat log array. The messages are then read from the chat log array by using a map method on the log and using some logic to decide whether or not it's from somebody else or from you, creates these two different text bubbles in order to decide where it goes. So now let's go and look at our login and registration. This is where the really crazy stuff happened for me. So basically on our login and registration screen, we have forms that are just being handled by Formic. I do not have any form validation or anything going on right now. When you log in, it triggers this handle login function. This handle login function will then do a fetch to the server in order to check if the user exists. If it does, okay, cool, get the web token, okay, cool. Now store that token in a cookie, awesome. Now also get the username and then store that in local storage so that we can use it later and then navigate to the chat. The registration function is quite a bit simpler. All it's doing is triggering registration with a post request, making the account, and then responding with it being successful. When it's successful, it navigates to login automatically so that you can log in. Now, the chat box is actually a protected route using just this little utility in order to trigger a GET request to an authentication check on the server, just to check and see if the client actually has a web token, and if it does it work? If it doesn't, it's gonna say nah and not let you actually navigate to it and push you back to the login screen. If you are authenticated, then you're going to be pushed to the chat. So we're gonna look at one more thing on the client side. All the chat is stored in MongoDB under a collection. And basically what's happening is that the client is making a GET request to an API endpoint that's going to get all of the documents within that collection and send them back and stick them in the log state, generating them on the UI. So if you refresh the page, it'll still show up. No matter how many messages you've got going on, it'll always come back. Even if you log out and log back in, it'll come back. Let's talk about the challenges I faced. One of the biggest challenges I faced was handling user authentication between the server and the client. Creating an account wasn't hard. Figuring out how to send back a cookie containing my JWT and then figuring out how to actually use it client side took a long time. I tried a million things until realizing that I set my cookie to HTTP only, and I couldn't access it with JavaScript and needed to instead use it from the headers. Once I got that, I was golden. But there were way more challenges than a 5-minute video can possibly explain. I faced a lot, I did a lot of Googling, I did a lot of chat GPTing, I drank a lot of coffee, and I got really emotional over this thing. But I'm proud of what I've done and what I've made here. And even though I still have more to finish, I feel really good about it. That's my project. Thank you for watching.